Hello and welcome back to the Argyle SMB Finance Leadership Forum, SMB Finance Strategies for Growth. My name is Michael with Argyle. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. Now, to ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Teddy Collins, Vice President of Corporate Finance with SeatGeek. We're excited to have Teddy and our panelists with us for a panel discussion titled Evolving SMB Finance, Defining New Roles and Responsibilities. Teddy, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Michael. We're certainly excited to delve into this topic today. Just a bit about my background. I'm Teddy Collins, VP of Corporate Finance at SeatGeek. We're a mobile live entertainment platform, and under my scope are things like planning, treasury, and financial operations. We're just going to do a quick round of intros for each of the panelists. Brian, could you kick us off?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be here and excited to attend. My name is Brian McKernan. I'm the Associate Director for Finance for Information Technology and Services Division at the United States Naval Academy. A little bit about my background. I was a Marine pilot for 20 years. And midway through my career, I went and got an MBA in financial management and did 2 finance tours at the Pentagon for the Marine Corps, and then got out and went right to industry, a small startup company, a manned aerial systems company. Did that for 6 years, and then the opportunity came to come back to the government at the Naval Academy and work in the Information Technology Services divisions doing finance. So that's me. Happy to be here.
Great, thanks, Brian. And Kira.
Yes, I'm Kyra Coker with National Roofing Partners. We are a commercial roofing company based out of Dallas. And I've been here for about 5 years in construction finance for just over 20 years now. And again, happy to be here. Thanks for having us. This is a great topic. So thanks again.
Thank you. And Jeanette.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I am Jeanette Wade. I work for Century of Care Alliance. We're a $140 million not-for-profit in New England. I'm their Chief Financial and Chief Operating Officer. I've been here for 3 years. I've been in the finance space for over 20, mostly in the Boston area, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thanks for joining us today.
So we get kicked off, and we're in February, so maybe the first question is: have you all have your annual budgets all set? Are they kind of approved and ready to go? And kind of what are some of the main things you're doing this year, from hiring, finance transformation, to help your company achieve your plan? Any takers? How about Jeanette?
Sure. So we're actually on a June 30th annual close. And so our budgeting process is about to kick off in March so that we can get in front of our finance committee and then in front of our board in June. Some of the strategies, though, that we're planning for as we go out and meet with the operators is to really redefine our business models. As you know, the past couple of years have been really disruptive in the operations space from COVID, and we're in social services and in healthcare. And so the pressures on workforce, particularly in the clinical space, are very intense for us. So we're trying to incorporate strategies and plan and budget for strategies that will reduce the significant pressure on expense from workforce in the clinical arena.
Very good. How about Brian on your end?
Well, for me, it's kind of different because I'm back in the government sector. So we are full into Q2 in really our execution phase. But the planning for us is one of the most important parts. Unlike normal business sector where it's all about revenue, profit, reinvestment, planning for that and executing it. Here for us, it's all about executing and spending that money, tracking it, watching our spend, and then really trying to go out and go after more. So having a good plan up front on how you're going to execute, how you're going to spend, and then tracking it and actually executing, and sometimes over executing is a good thing, but because it allows you to go after more money to be able to support the institution or the organization you're working for. Very similar to the business world, but slightly different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd love to double click on that a bit. So, like you said, so it's not the traditional, ARR and revenue and stuff like that, LTV CAC. So what are some of the kind of key operational KPIs that you drive towards?
So, like I said, our key performance indicator is the number one is execution for sure. So when we initially go in and submit our budget, it's really no different than doing a sale, if you will. And like I said, I was CFO prior to my small startup company, and it was all about that business development, followed by the follow-up, followed by the sale, followed by the delivery, and then the revenue precedes that. For us, it's no different. It's about the business development and the sale. That's basically briefing your program, except you're not trying to make money. You're trying to retain what you've already been appropriated the year before and also go after more. And it's very difficult to get more than what your budget is, depending upon where you work and what kind of, if your operational forces, they're generally funded 90 to 100%, because clearly they're defending our freedom. But a lot of supporting establishments, if you will, installations, different things, they're only funded to 65, 70%. So you're always operating with less. Not much different than working for a small company or a startup. It's very, very similar. So you really need to stretch that shoestring budget. And then once you've spent all that money, go and ask for more and have the proof that you've actually spent all that money, which they can see. And then also have a really solid plan of how you're going to spend that money. Because of course we have timelines like everybody else in terms of the workload and who processes our requests to go out and get contracts. It's a pretty convoluted process, challenging, but if you know how to work within the system, you can have great success. And like I said, I had done about 6 years at the Pentagon doing this. So falling back from a small startup company and coming back here, falling into this role, it was seamless. So pretty exciting. And ultimately the goal is to be able to support, all the professors and the academic functions to be able to support the midshipmen so they can get commission, go out and defend our country. To me, there's nothing greater. So I'm really happy.
Great. And Kyra, I'm really hoping for a December fiscal year end for you. I'm on an island out here.
we in 12/31, so we're very normal. Yeah, similar. We actually finished our budgeting process in late September and then went to the board in October for board approval, received that, and then launched it company-wide in December. So we're operating off of our board approved budget right now. We're actually still kind of working on our year-end closeout, the last finishing touches of closing out 2022. But looking at our budget for 2023, very similar to Jeanette and Brian, but we also, interestingly enough, for the construction industry, because of inflation, just like a lot of businesses, 2022 was a great year. So as we looked at 2023 budgeting, we really had to dive into what our real numbers were, given inflation, and how to budget for 2023 and beyond accordingly from a staffing side and from, expenses, SG&A, things like that. So it was actually a quite challenging year to budget for because of everything that's happened the last few years on really figuring out where we actually are. So it was actually kind of fun, something new.
Yeah, can you tell a bit more about your company? I think on the pre-call you mentioned that you have quite a few stakeholders and are owned by other companies in your industry.
Yeah, our company is actually owned by several commercial roofing companies that came together back in 2007 and decided to form a company to provide a national footprint using local roofing companies. And we've grown over the years and now have over 230 roofing partners across the United States, Puerto Rico, Canada, Alaska, and Hawaii included. And so that footprint just kind of keeps growing for us. But we still have a lot of those same original owners. Of those, we have 7 of those that actually make up our board of managers that kind of manage the decision making. And then of course we have a CEO, myself, I'm the CFO and company integrator, and then we have a COO, and we sit on the board as well.
That's good. That sounds like quite the stakeholder management exercise there.
It is. I tell people it's a very interesting to see that from the private side. I've been in a public business before where we have, quite a few stakeholders. This is the first time I've been a part of a privately held company that had so many shareholders.
That's great. Yeah, so you mentioned you have a lot of tailwinds in your industry. Jeanette, I'd like to come back to you. You mentioned expense management and really keeping an eye on personnel costs. How's the industry been as far as maybe tell a bit about your funding sources as far as donations and what you're doing on the expense front?
Sure. So we are funded by state and federal funding and donations and grants. And what we're trying to do to control expenses really, we're about 70% on the healthcare side and about 30% on the community service side, social work. Anything from immigration to language and interpretation services to transportation to children and family services. And then on the clinical side, we're in the senior care space. And so what we're trying to actually do to control costs because of the nursing crisis, we are trying to partner with colleges and universities to begin to build our own pipeline of employee resources and then have internal programs that support their career advancement and their education internally. And we believe actually, even though that requires an investment in educational resources and bringing people in at lower tiers, we believe that that investment will certainly offset significant external agency expense where we have to go to third-party agencies to get clinical resources. So the strategy is really to partner in the communities in which we work and give opportunities to people coming out of the education system to advance their careers and advance them with us.
Yeah, I'm so curious, and we can stay right here with you, Jeanette, of as far as planning cycles and annual, monthly, quarterly, has there been any shift over the last couple of years to respond to the either changing environments or
Sure. So it's interesting because right before COVID hit, we had established some new quarterly forecasting, right? Because data is information and information is power. And we really want to empower our executive team to make the best decisions they can. And so we had revamped our forecasting process and we're ready to go with a quarterly cycle. And then COVID hit and our quarterly forecast became a daily forecast and the executive team met daily and we were updating it in real time so that we could pivot and make the decisions we needed to be sustainable and keep the organization going. Many of our programs got shut down. We provide transportation services to foster kids in partnership with a lot of the state governments, and schools closed. So we were no longer providing those rides. Our interpretation services, we partner with courts and hospitals. The courts closed and the hospitals shut down except for emergency response. And so pivoting our way through that with real-time data and forecasting and scenario planning also became a really big part of the conversation. So that we could evaluate what our options were and if then what would we do. So certainly our cycles got heavily impacted. We've since dialed that back now where our forecast is weekly, but I can't foresee us ever even going to monthly. Our reliance upon data and actually the business's consumption of the data, they now come to expect real-time information to be able to respond and react.
Yeah, I can certainly empathize with the switch to daily and multiple times per day. How are your systems ready for that kind of immediate switch from, month-end close data to intraday data?
They were not, because we've grown organically over time and we're 150 years old. We have about 23 different client management systems, and our technology roadmap was focused on security, cybersecurity. And so really it was just sort of an all hands on deck, leveraging the tools that we had. But as we think about future planning, and I think one of the things we were going to discuss today is what does that future look like, right? And so now that we've had the opportunity to make our way through the crisis, what would the most effective and beneficial tools be so that we can effectuate the same work, but much more, in a much more productive manner?
Great. And I'd love to switch over to back to Kyra and kind of thinking about scenario planning and if you've had the, I guess, the fortunate experience of having a upside, having tailwinds and being things like supply chain constrained and working through that. So how have you approached plan? Do you think of things as a range of outcomes? How has that changed for you the last couple of years?
I think we've always, in any finance role that you're in, you always have plan A, plan B, plan C, right? We wouldn't be good finance leaders if we weren't planning for those unexpected. But I think the 2020 year and then 2021 and 2022 for us with the construction industry and across the board, I'm sure many industries had the supply chain issues. We had to go to plan D and E for the first time in my career. So I think what we've started doing is being a little bit more fluid in our plans, and we basically are establishing a budget that is what we expect conservatively we can do as a company and what we kind of operate on. And then instead of being an annual planning, to Jeanette's point of quarterly, we are weekly and monthly making adjustments where necessary, right? So if we had plans for hiring where we used to make those on an annual, we now look at those more on a monthly and quarterly, what hirings are needed, what spending is needed. It's become a much more fluid process than it's ever been, because you have to budget, but then you also really have to be able to pivot. Inflation was, one of those areas that's good. It may look like you're doing an extra 50 million in revenue, but when you really look at what that is from an inflation standpoint, what does your bottom line look like? And making sure that we're not spending money that's going out in a different direction. So it's definitely been quite the challenge, but I think we've kind of navigated it and figured out how to make adjustments. And so that's what we're doing, is just, again, weekly, monthly, quarterly, looking at our budget and making sure we're staying on track. And that may mean making adjustments where we're spending. It may mean making adjustments on bringing in additional salespeople or holding off on certain expenditures, but constantly making adjustments.
I'm curious on that weekly and monthly process. How does headcount planning fit into that as far as evaluating how your recruiting efforts have gone? Do you look at funnel data and kind of how many hiring groups kind of do you hire for from a workforce management perspective? Do you have actual from hourly workers to G&A people working for the corporate functions?
Yeah. And I think so for us, again, we have like our minimum budget. This is the budget that we're working off of, our conservative kind of side. And then from there, we are setting certain gates. So each time we reach a certain gate on what's been sold, what's in backlog, where we're at, then we look at what we're hiring for the upcoming month and quarter. Before, we kind of made those decisions based on the year and based on what we think we would do. And now it's much more, okay, here we are in January, as an example, we hit 40% higher than where we thought we were going to be. So instead of hiring only, 20% of what we thought we would for the entire year in first quarter, we're actually going to hire 40% of our workforce for 23 in first quarter. So it's just making those adjustments based on what's actually coming in instead of what we're projecting. Prior, I think our business was very much based on projections, and now it's much more based on what we're actually seeing in front of us and working off of that.
And is your company's data, also powered or impacted by the data and the sales trends of your ownership base?
Not so much. I mean, they are a part of it, and you see that, but it's very similar, right? You see it across the board. Great.
Yeah, kind of staying on the operations themes, Brian, when thinking about core processes and CFOs and the finance function have become more operational, more analytical, more data focused, you really kind of keyed on as the number one KPI being execution. So what have you seen as far as moving out of the traditional, controllership function and reporting? What do you do as far as execution and kind of keeping that operational rigor within your business?
Yeah, so again, I'm gonna reach back to my previous company because it's more germane toward this question. Working for a small startup unmanned aerial service company or drone company. Like I said, it was a British-based company, and I started up in the U.S. when I retired. Grew the business over 6 years, and did not start out really in the CFO role, though I had a very strong background in finance. But I was essentially everything in the US. I was CEO, if you will, for the company in the United States, with our base being in the UK. And the operations piece for me, because it was an aviation company, I had such a strong background in it, having flown, for 15 out of my 20 years in the Marine Corps, all different type model series airframes, and having tons of experience, plus coupling that with being a trained crash investigator, if you will, like NTSB for the Marine Corps. That was coming on strong in this industry, in the unmanned industry, that people really, most people don't understand. When you get in your car every day, you don't pre-flight your car. You get in, you put your seatbelt on, you turn the engine on, you go. But when you're talking about things flying in the air and aviation, whether it's unmanned or manned, it's important that, safety's everything. Essentially, it really is. So for me, switching really my last 2 years with my company to the CFO role and handling all sales, business, marketing for the company globally. Now, keep in mind, we had folks in the UK, we had folks in the US, we had operations in South America, Canada, Africa. That was a lot to handle. But because I had so much operational experience in my Marine Corps time, having been a flight instructor, you name it, I had a hard time staying out, if that makes sense, and only staying in the finance piece. So, managing the P&L and, looking in my CRM every day and watching where we were at, but then getting out and doing business development and sales and kind of being the front facing person in the US for the company. It was hard for me not to, I wouldn't say overstep, but kind of step into the operations realm when I really shouldn't have, because now I'm CFO, but at the same time, I've got all the experience and I'm still flying and I'm still certified flying planes and unmanned aircraft. That sometimes caused a little bit of a rift between ops and sales, if you will, because once that sale is made, you hand everything off to the operations team and customer success managers and sales guys and BD guys. They're on to the next client, but still kind of following up the client to make sure things are going well. So I think I think communication is a huge factor in making sure those teams work neck and neck, if you will. And our senior operations guy, he was always great about kind of bringing me on and keeping me up to speed and keeping me trained, because I don't think there's a lot of value if someone who's going out and doing sales, especially in our niche industry, which is brand new. It's still emerging. It's been emerging since 2013. You need to know what you're talking about, and you need to be able to execute and do that. So those financial functions, the operations, the sales, the business development, they're all kind of mixed together. So hopefully that answered your question.
Definitely, for sure. Yeah, I'd like to open it back up to the panel and kind of dive into the work from home trends that have been going on in the last few years, and just how you kind of managed that from a process perspective. Or first of all, how's it been for you? Our personal company, we've gone from the vast majority being in office. We have offices across Europe, headquarters in New York City, Portland office. But now it's, our policy is kind of based on what the employee wants to do, from going in several days a week, once a week, being fully remote. And for us, we've certainly we've luckily been a cloud native company, so a lot of the productivity tools and processes were already set up for that. But how's it been for you? Maybe Kyra,
Yeah, I'm actually working from home today because all the streets are shut down due to ice. And 3 years ago, we probably would have just closed the office, our home office, and let everybody take a snow day. But now everyone's working from home. For our company, we have a lot of remote employees that work throughout the United States. I have a controller that works in Alaska, and we have salespeople that work all over, and project managers. So it's not unique for us, but for that core office personnel to work from home has definitely been an adjustment, and we try to be flexible. I think if we've learned anything, it's through the great resignation that happened. We have to be flexible as employers on what we allow our employees to do, as long as they effectively do their job. I don't see any issues with working from home. As a company, we've took on different software packages like Slack, which is a communication tool, and Zoom, which integrates with Slack. And, our main service software is cloud-based, and we're now looking at an ERP system that's cloud-based, right? And just whatever we can do to make it as seamless as possible. That's our approach. It hasn't been easy necessarily, but I think we've gotten there for the most part.
Yeah, and Jeanette, you're helping real people in the real world. So how has that in-person versus remote mix changed for you all?
Yes, so we have 2,000 employees. The majority of our employee base are frontline workers who are helping people and serving patients and clients. Our back office staff went remote immediately, of course. When we had to close our offices, we took advantage actually of closing some of our offices and didn't renew leases to reduce fixed costs purposefully. We now offer remote and hybrid depending on the employee, similar to Kyra, that is the expectation of our employee base that are not frontline workers. For my team, I feel like it really brought us closer together, actually. A lot of times I would travel around New England and meet with folks once a week, every 2 weeks, and with leveraging video conferencing, right, whether it's Zoom or Teams or whatever tool you're using, I could connect with you 3 times today if I have a question, right? And I can see you now instead of just calling you on the phone. And it really, really brought senior leadership much closer to folks, down in their line level folks all the time. So I think it's working well. We feel like people are doing a good job, and as long as they're getting their job done, we are finding it to be very effective. We are getting together on a pretty regular basis, purposefully in person, to keep the personal connection going and to try to ensure that our frontline workers feel valued.
Yeah, that's great. So such a large company, you've got some people remote, some people in offices. Can you just tell a bit more about any other processes or systems that help you do that kind of cross-team collaboration or communication? Like you mentioned, you've kept the weekly operating cadence. Kind of who are the stakeholders in that meeting, and is that kind of part of the glue that helps keep part of your team together?
It is. We actually set up an additional process too. We call them business alignment meetings, and they're weekly and they're cross-functional. So we have a business alignment meeting on the senior care side and a business alignment meeting on the community service side, and that includes HR and IT and finance and the operators. And that has gone a long way in keeping us connected and having regular current conversations. That's actually probably been one of the most important things.
Yeah, and Brian, you mentioned that you did the good work of CFO and jumping in operations, sales, and how did you manage, going back to that topic, was there any friction that came, and I think you were talking about with your prior companies, any friction that bubbled up to say, hey, stay in your lane, or was it kind of met with a helping hand? Good
No,
incentive?
I mean, it was pretty, like I said, pre-COVID, because we were global, we were US and we were UK, we probably had, I don't know, maybe probably 20 to 25 employees in the UK. And I was in a one-man fighting hole my first year, building the business up, and we grew to about 10 or 12 in the US. Like Kyra had said, we had been using Slack all along. It was the way we communicated. Google Meets, we did that for all of our meetings pre-COVID because we had to. We weren't all in the same office, but we were a very small company. So that communication, the barriers weren't there. We were used to that. What really did cripple us when COVID hit was I won't call them our frontline workers, but our operators that actually go out and execute missions, whether it's training or flying, they couldn't go anywhere. And one of the real conundrums that we faced was that because we were global, we had a very set schedule of deliverables for people to go to Canada, to go to South America. So now I've got a guy in the UK that has to literally go spend 2 weeks in Turkey to quarantine in order to get into the US because of all the travel restrictions during COVID, or down in Barbados for 2 weeks in order to get to South America. It was really, really weird and strange, and it was difficult. On the flip side, like Jeanette said, we pretty much shut down our main UK office and we consolidated into our angel investors office at Heathrow. We were able to shut down our US office as well and consolidate. So we saved a lot of money there. We saved a lot of money on travel. We saved a lot of money on shows and conferences. But the problem is, as you can tell from me, that's where we make the money, when I'm out talking and selling. So trying to do that business development and sales and get after it via LinkedIn, it was brutal. It really brought us to a halt until we could really figure out how to switch gears and get after people. And there were some silver linings in terms of implementing these aircraft for good, for delivering vaccines, which we did from point A to point B to the Isle of Wight from one of the hospitals in London. That was really neat. We were able to do that. And that was great press. But, as a very, very small company, under 50 people, who you were looking at the P&L daily and getting to the point where it's like, do we write the checks for our employees or do we move forward? It's extremely, extremely challenging. So yes, we were able to reduce spend on fixed costs, overhead, and travel and things of that nature, but it was very difficult to generate revenue and business, not being able to get out there and deliver on the business that we had already signed off on. So that was challenging.
The other silver lining sounds like the person who got to spend 2 extra weeks in Barbados. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, we did bust his chops quite a bit there, but he got very sunburned and he he had to stay in his hotel room. But his food is what do you call it? The food service. The room service bill was quite high.
Sunburned, but had to stay in the hotel room.
That's right.
So speaking of small companies, large companies, just staying with you, Brian, what are some of the differences and the challenges of small versus medium, large companies that you've experienced?
Sure. So to me, and I'll equate, my time in the Marine Corps and working here at the Naval Academy, both having pretty robust budgets, vice working for, a startup company, shoestring budget. I think the two biggest things that we faced was, one, raising capital to keep your revenue above your expenses, which we did not do, at least in the US for our first year. The UK was thriving much more. They'd been around, they were much more mature. So they kind of carried the day, if you will, or carried the weight. But raising that capital, we had angel investors, seed money, working toward that certain break point where you could bust in and go for that Series A funding, working toward that. And then after a year or two, and I finally kind of figured things out, was reducing the spend. So again, like Kyra, going to shows and conferences, I was traveling at least 2 weeks out of every month. I was gone, going to shows and getting out there. And what we really learned was, one, for me, being a subject matter expert in this area, this unmanned space and manned space, getting speaking slots. So your conference fees are covered, $1,000, but hey, that's $1,000 you wouldn't have to spend, and reducing the time that you're there. I used to go for the whole conference 5 days. I'd be there all 5 days. And it took about a year or two to realize that I really don't need to be there that entire time. So maybe I go down the day before, I walk around the showroom floor, I meet with some existing clients, go out to dinner, do the BD thing. The next day, sit on the panel, and then that afternoon, I'm out of there. Reduce hotel costs, and then reduce the footprint of the number of the people that need to be there. We were a little over anxious. I think our first year with one of the big conferences and bringing the entire company, like 20 people, and a lot of people sat around and did nothing, and we spent a lot of money. And what was the ROI on that one? Not a lot. So as we got more mature, and I moved up in the company in terms of roles, we made sure that we, during our planning, before we would do a budget, we would plan out the conferences we were going to, who was going to go, and we'd really ask the hard questions like, do you really need to be there? and as the company grew, we really didn't have a lot of spare people to actually go to these conferences because they were actually out delivering and making money and delivering services. So that was a good thing. But I just think those two things, getting smart at controlling your expenses, will enable you to not exceed the revenue that's coming in, because you really, the whole point of business is to stay in business and make sure you're profitable, or at least breaking even on the nonprofit side. So
that's great. So staying on a similar topic, going to you, Jeanette, you mentioned before the pandemic is high focus on security. It sounds like you had a lot of internal systems and different CRMs and how you interacted with your staff. What have been some of the more recent finance transformation stories from ERP, any private cloud transformation of applications?
Sure. So on the I think electronic medical records is probably the biggest thing we're working on right now. And so taking paper-based administration of medical records, blood pressure, stats, all of those things in client care, we're migrating to electronic medical records, electronic med distribution. And so that's required an investment in hardware. You've probably seen iPads rolling around on carts. So we've had to invest in not only the hardware, but the software, and we've had rolling implementations across our sites. So that's a pretty big thing on the financial side. And of course, that's going to reduce the error rate and allow us to bill quicker and everything else. So it has a positive financial impact, even though it's not in the finance team. We have gone to a new P card carrier. We have gone to expense automation with Certify, which has been super phenomenal. We didn't have like remote receipt capture or anything like that. So it's brought us into the current days. So all through the pandemic, actually, we've been working on moving the needle forward from a technology perspective.
That's interesting. So I guess that realization just hit me. So you actually have kind of like HIPAA sensitive health data in your
Absolutely
actual EMR application. Yep. I could see how security is definitely top.
That's right.
For you. Great.
Yep.
And how about you, Kyra? What's been on your the roadmap and kind of upcoming stuff on the transformation front?
Yeah, so we actually also use Certify, Jeanette, and it's fantastic. I think, for us, we kind of consider ourselves somewhat of a technology company. So we've always been a little bit, I feel like, ahead of the game on that. We use artificial intelligence, drones for inspections. And then from a, in-office standpoint, we're very much always trying to see how we move the needle. In our company, we actually even have what's called a technology task force. And so it's made up of 5 employees from different areas of the business, and they drive what we can do to set ourselves apart and be proactive from a technology standpoint. They amaze me every day with some of the things they come up with. But, Brian, you mentioned you guys have always used Slack. We've used it for a long time, but weren't really using it to its full capabilities. And so that was one of the things the technology task force did, was really drive that home on how you can integrate it with other parts of the business and getting everybody actually engaged in using it. So, and
do you have a set budget for those types of initiatives? Because you might be okay to come up with ideas, but then actually resources to do it.
Yes.
To make sure it goes well.
Yeah. And so we have a set, IT and software budget. And I'll tell you that it seems like every year that's the one area that we either go slightly over budget or are constantly having to tell people, well, you're gonna have to wait till next year. It's not in the budget for this year. And I feel like we have a pretty healthy budget for that, but still it's ever changing. I was at a conference recently and that came up, and it is something where I feel like every time we find a solution that we believe is going to be holistic, there's so many little tentacles that come off that need other softwares to work with it, or it wasn't quite right. And so it's just an ever evolving part of the business. And something that I think can set you apart though, right? So for us, we have been developing like a client portal so that our clients can access their information and be able to provide them what they need. And it's hard though. It's not easy.
Yeah, certainly with all the rise of SaaS applications and others, software to manage software, it's definitely a never-ending process. So on that front, as far as kind of staying on budget, what are some of the tools and processes you use to either from procurement, reporting to make sure that you stay on track?
Yeah, so we have Sage 300 as our ERP system, and we're trying to make sure that it integrates with everything. From a processes standpoint, we've recently started using a software called Way We Do, which is a pretty robust process software. And what that allows is an opportunity to develop processes and then actually assign roles. So if you have a role that's assigned to it, like let's say a project coordinator needs to check the box on a contract that goes into the system in order to issue commitments and purchase orders and things like that, it will actually be sent to her through there as, did you check the box on getting that part of the process done? And it has lucid charts and things like that are kind of all integrated into it. That's kind of our big project for 2023. As you grow, especially when you're growing 30 to 40% year over year, the processes are really easy to get overlooked. And so that's what we've started really working on, from not only a technology, but just how we operate as a company, is focusing on our processes. And that software is helping, but it's been a lot of pen to paper, sitting in rooms and whiteboarding what those processes are. It's been quite the overhaul. And I'm sure everyone else has the same, but the CFO now has such a large area of responsibility, right? IT, HR, processes, you name it, it seems to fall under the CFO umbrella. So we're working on that in the background.
Yeah, certainly. Even, and especially the items and processes that no one wants to do, kind of the buck stops. So that's great that you said that you've got the kind of that operational process glue, and we've certainly at SeatGeek been more of the best of breed, bring your own software, each department do their own thing. But when I joined, we were just under 100 people, now we're 800 people, hundreds of million financing people all over the place. I think there's a definite need and thirst for people in the company to I want the one tool to go to do my things, and not 5-point solutions to get this contract approved or something like that.
Yeah.
So let's go back to you, Brian, and as far as tell us a bit more about your kind of staffing for your group and for your whole company. What's the current environment for you? Kind of what's your outlook on different ways to address how to keep and retain and get new talent in the door?
It's a great question, and I'll take that one. For working for the Naval Academy right now in the government, like I said, I've been removed from my previous company for about 19 months. It's difficult. It's difficult in the government space because we are essentially here at ITSD, we're a service organization for most. Not so much in my cell, if you will, for the finance, because we can pretty much do everything remote. I'm the newest member of the team, and the rest have been here for years. But in terms of actually getting out and doing things on the yard, that's what they call the Naval Academy. We have sectors with folks out there that are servicing all kinds of ticket requests, whether it's service or servers or distributed antenna systems. You name it, everything IT we do, we buy, we purchase. So it's tough with government. It's difficult to retain people. Getting back to your previous point, and pretty much every single person except me has said this on this call, you can either work remote, you can do hybrid, you can do 100% remote, or you can come in. It's not like that here. And we have switched over to, there are opportunities to do optional telework a few days a week, but it's difficult because we are service oriented, and we have had a a decent rate of turnover, which is difficult because this is such a bespoke organization. Again, not inside the finance, but in terms of programmers and coding and working on servers and things of that nature. It's hard to get really, really great qualified people in here and then to retain them because people are able to work 5 days at home in their pajamas and do whatever they want. And so to me, we're moving in a good trajectory by being able to kind of do a hybrid. And it's really all about trust. It's about trusting your people to work. For me, coming from my previous company, everybody pretty much worked at home because we were all over the world all the time. And again, getting back to systems, I lived in Salesforce. I didn't need KPIs every day for my guys because all I needed to do was go into Salesforce, the CRM, look at my dashboard, and I could see exactly what they're doing all day long. And then leadership could see it, senior leaders. So for me, I didn't need that because I knew whether they were doing their job or not. I didn't need to get bogged down in Slack and conversations and having meetings. I just wanted to see results, and my dashboard would be able to provide all of that. Other jobs, it's not that easy to be able to do that. So I think a big part of it is trust and being able to trust your people and give them the latitude, treat them like they're adults, and then let them go and do their thing. And like I said, it's all about production. And I think if you trust your people, you communicate with them, you treat them well, treat them the way anybody else would want to be treated, you'll have great success. And that's what we're trying to do here. So
Great answer. Yes, we're just a few minutes to the end of the panel. It's gone by super quick. If we could just do maybe a 1-minute wrap up, kind of any final thoughts on the topic or anything else, Jeanette.
Sure. I mean, I guess I would just say that to echo what Kyra said, which is the role of the CFO and our teams are ever evolving, right? And the pace that we're evolving is much quicker than ever before. And so, the role of reporting on historical data and thinking about enterprise risk, and insurance and banking and those things, that's only a small piece of the job now, right? Really being partners with the business. And like you said, Brian, being outside of our lane, but influencing and helping inform the business and really being much stronger partners is the current climate, at least in my world.
Kyra.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think it's ever evolving, and what the CFO was 10 years ago is much different today than it was then. And so I'm guessing that in the next 10 years, it's going to be that much different than what it is now. So I think our role is to continue to keep our eye on what the numbers are and what the business is doing financially, but to be able to pivot what we're doing to mold to what the business needs. At the end of the day, I always see the CFO as the backbone of the business. And so whatever we can do to keep it going strong is what I think we'll continue to do.
Awesome. I agree. Ringing endorsement, ring our own bells with backbone. How about you, Brian?
I completely agree. And I'll just kind of end with this, that the CFO or the finance person, they touch everything. It doesn't matter what organization. And generally, the last question, once something has been teed up on the table, is they turn around and they say, Jeanette, Kyra, can we do this? Do we have the money to do this? That is the absolute, the CEO to the finance person. It's the end of the conversation. Do we have the money to do this? And you're the yes, no person. You're the good, bad person. You are it. So again, I'll toot the horn because we're ultimately the ones that are, going to answer for it. And, when we look back at the, 2000s and Arthur Andersen, everything, Sarbanes-Oxley came out, right? CEO and the CFO are the ones that sign the financial statements. That's a pretty big deal. So, yeah, it's you're the man or woman, period. It's the way it is.
Yeah, just to kind of echo on that and kind of close it out, a lot more hats. I think we've got the traditional finance functions, but we have to be experts in data. We're designers, marketers, accountants, programmers, system architects. So I think for us, it's just about how to get the right group of talent and assembling the team and really kind of encouraging a learning environment so we can kind of keep evolving with all the trends that come up. And, just preliminary, thanks for everyone for joining the panel, and we're going to kick it back to Michael for closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Teddy.
Thank you, Teddy.
Thank you, Teddy, Kyra,
Thanks.
Brian, Jeanette. Thank you so much for an insightful panel discussion. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. Now, this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Teddy and everyone, thank you so much.